From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
And we're back. Now, before we continue on, I want you to do something. If you're not driving, and you can do this, head on over to YouTube and search for IQT or In-Q-Tel. It's got dashes in between, so in-Q-Tel. Find their YouTube channel. Look it up. Then know that on that channel there's an unlisted video titled IQT Celebrates 20 Years of Innovation, and you can find it through their website. Check out that video. Like, watch it before we go into this, because it's gonna give you a corporate speak version of like what we're about to tell you in their own words.
Synergy.
It's worth it. Just so you guys know, they'll say, I think In-Q-Tel is the only vehicle that sits at the intersection set of government, venture capital, and the startup community. And then the other guy says, sitting at the intersection of these two worlds that don't know each other and don't really talk to each other, and being trusted by both of them, that's really the secret sauce of In-Q-Tel.
So those statements sound fine, shiny, utopian, intersection, secret sauce, all the hits, all the good ones. But it doesn't answer the question from before the break. So to reiterate, what is the CIA actually doing through In-Q-Tel? Here's where it gets crazy. You might not have heard of In-Q-Tel before today, and that's fine. It's not a top secret thing, but it is sort of obscure unless you live in one of these venture capital tech startup worlds. But whether or not you've heard of them, it is highly likely that if you have used some of the tech that they have funded, you might already be familiar with their mapping technology. IQT, back in the day, invested in something called Keyhole Incorporated.
Oh, I remember this.
What, you remember this?
Keyhole,
yeah, Keyhole. Yeah, it was later acquired, Keyhole that is, by Google, by Big G itself in 2004, and today IQT's investment as Google Earth.
That's the one. Oh. I remember this from my days producing Jonathan Strickland's show Tech Stuff, and he talked about Keyhole and that whole kind of development into what we now know as Google Earth. That's why it rang a bell.
Hey,
yeah.
Do you guys remember what Keyhole actually refers to?
The satellite system.
The spy satellite system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true, folks. Matt is correct. And what's fascinating about the Keyhole satellite operations is I'm still so surprised, and I have to admit, objectively impressed by how that worked. They were using satellites to take photographs from space of places where they couldn't, get a human spy or have a traditional aircraft fly over. But the technology of the time, when Keyhole and Corona were in play, the technology of the time was not super advanced. They couldn't just remotely send or electronically send these images. They had cameras on the satellites. The cameras used film, like actual rolls of film, for anybody of a certain age who might remember those. And then they would drop the canisters from space. Who is the hapless, incredibly intelligent person who had to go out and find those film canisters?
Yeah.
Like how
it's insane.
How accurate were they able to be? Was it like, okay, be on 3rd and 72nd at 4 p.m. and just hold your hand up to the sky? Or is it like somewhere in Utah? What are you doing this weekend? We think it's somewhere on the left side of Utah. And then they say, do you mean the western side? and they go, I don't know. It's 4:30, man. It's a Friday. Just
get go with
film.
It. Yeah, just get it.
But you're right. You're right. So Keel's Google Earth, that's only one example.
Can we just jump to a little more information on that, just because it is so fascinating, and it's a great entry point for you if you're interested in learning more about this. Like, go down the Keyhole, In-Q-Tel, Google rabbit hole, and you can really start there and start to see other things. There's a Guardian article titled Google's Earth, How the Tech Giant is Helping the State Spy on Us. It was written in 2018. And if you look through there, it describes I think the investment was finalized in 2003, according to this article, and it was made in partnership with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That is one of the intelligence agencies or the apparatus that the United States has. And their job was to deliver satellite-based intelligence to the CIA and the Pentagon. And essentially, they incorporated this new company, Keyhole, in the software they were creating, this version of Earth, this virtual Earth, and were able to use it for their needs. And then, of course, Google comes along and makes it public-facing. And there's a whole other story we could get into there about data collection and why Google may want to have something like that. But we don't have to go into that now.
Well, we're already a part of that. Everybody listening is already a part of it, even if you've never touched Google somehow.
I'm sorry, really quickly. Is the implication here that like Keyhole was meant for something greater and then ultimately kind of got co-opted into something that has ultimately become kind of an internet parlor trick? Like, I mean, I know there's uses for Google Earth, but at the end of the day, people more use it for doing scavenger hunts and marking it up for blogs and things like that, or sharing. It doesn't seem like what its intent initially was using these high-tech satellites. It's now become a bit of almost a gimmick.
Well, I'll tell you what it was used for in the early 2000s, around 2003, because what happened around 2003? We invaded Iraq. It was used as an extra set of intelligence to monitor the movements around certain bases in Iraq, around, certain strategic points in Iraq. They were using Keyhole to do that, or the thing that was Keyhole.
And this, again, this is only one example. We could do, as a matter of fact, I was thinking about it a few years ago, doing just like a mini series, a limited podcast where we just go episode by episode, weird companies and their government ties and how frequently it happens and how seldom it is publicized or admitted, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe I'd love to do a stuff that wants, limited series on something. Cryptids, yeah. I don't know. We're interested. Let us know, because we have tons of free time. And it is true. You could make a series about just this, because Google Earth is one successful example of a process that occurs often and that I believe will accelerate in the future, in the very near future, by the way. But now, in the year, like from the early 2000s to the current day, you will find no shortage of rumors about IQT investment. And one of the most popular claims is that IQT, and therefore the CIA, had a big hidden hand in the creation of Facebook.
At least the expansion of it, right?
Right. This is pretty interesting. But the claim itself, unfortunately, gets a little bit tenuous when you dig into it. Walk through this really quickly. So the CIA has In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel tries to, throw money at tech startups. In-Q-Tel has a board of directors made up of people who have experience in this field. Its first CEO, Gilman Louie, used to, once upon a time, serve on the board of a place called the National Venture Capital Association. While he was on that board, there was another guy on the board named James Breyer, and he ran a capital firm called Excel Partners, and they invested in a lot of stuff. One of the companies they invested in was Facebook. So that's kind of like a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon association. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. It is. But the one thing we do know, and that we're going to get into a little later here, is that In-Q-Tel is attempting to invest in anything that is cutting edge, especially when it comes to data collection and analysis.
Oh, yeah. Like like early 2000s, there was significant investment in imaging technologies. We'll get into that. That led to some criticism for them as well, which is kind of valid. But you're absolutely right, Matt. And it's weird because if the five of us on the show today, you listening at home, Matt, Noel, Mission Control, and I, if we were like a little startup and we were working on something interesting related to this, like we found a faster way to encrypt or decrypt things like that, or, it's several years ago and we invented blockchain, then according to the Washington Post, we would get a call from In-Q-Tel. They would cold call us. Their fingers are in a ton of figurative pies. The Washington Post says that, quote, virtually any U.S. entrepreneur, inventor, or research scientist working on ways to analyze data has probably received a phone call from In-Q-Tel or has at least been Googled by its staff of technology watchers. First off, that sounds like a cool job. You just watch technology,
Totally.
you just find out what's new.
We do a bit of that. A bit of this, a bit of that. Ben, this makes me think of, and I forget what the exact name of the law is, but you know how the government can basically take your patent away from you if it's something that's threatening to national security. Is this sort of in that zone? Is this not like we'll take your patent away, but you got to do this thing for us? Is that?
Well, it's prescient. You're touching on something we do need to explore, which would be the criticisms. So it should be no surprise to anyone that the CIA and IQT have their fair share of critics. We can walk through some of this, and we'll get to the law you mentioned here. So IQT's explanation of their organizational setup and their partnership with the CIA, it seems contradictory to some people because it's almost a sugar daddy situation because they say, IQT officials, employees say, okay, yes, the CIA pays us money. We have an annual contract with them. We know what they like. They know what we like, but we are independent. Despite the fact that we run virtually all our investment decisions by Uncle Sam first for approval, and despite the fact that we intentionally look for the stuff that they want and do what they tell us to do, we are independent.
Yeah, we're independent. I mean? But you heard the words from those folks. I mean, it's very odd. If you go to their website, we keep talking about. I'm just going to read you if you can't get there for any reason. I'm going to read you what it says at the top. It says innovation on a mission, visionary startups, experienced VCs, venture capitalists, dedicated government professionals. In-Q-Tel leads from the center of this matrix. What? They lead from the center of the matrix. Connecting cutting-edge technology, strategic investments, and purpose to enhance and advance national security for the U.S. and its allies. So it clearly has a mission that is government-facing, right? And it doesn't mean it's necessarily an arm of the government in that way, the way you would think of the CIA is, but it is, I don't know, it's a finger?
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's a valid question to ask. Is it a private, not-for-profit entity and it has one customer, right? Which would be the CIA? Or is it more, should we think of it more like a quasi-governmental organization, similar to the Fed?
I think that's what we're talking about, because you do have people that run the show there, like Michael Crow, who's chairman. He's the chairman of the board of trustees, who feels a little more independent. Steve Bauscher that we mentioned earlier, and Chris Darby. But then also sitting on the board of trustees, the guy that Ben mentioned much early on, who used to be the director of the CIA, George Tenet. He is currently he's on the board of trustees. So we know that government officials jump to the private sector, and private sector people generally don't jump to the government in that way, unless they're an elected official. But it's And it's an interesting thing to see that direct connective tissue to the guy that kind of started, or one of the people that began the show over there at In-Q-Tel.
Yeah, and that leads to a question I think a lot of us always wonder about a little bit. How many business decisions are made unofficially? How many agreements happen while someone is at the same fundraiser or, charity event or
private club.
golf? Yeah, or at the barbecue. You know what I mean? At the country club, drinking the she crab soup. And then, by the time you leave, you have made some important decisions that will go on to impact millions of people, but nothing official ever happened. You're just friends of friends talking to folks you accidentally run into. It's beautiful. It's terrifying, but it's a beautiful system in the way it's laid out. You got to respect it. This is just the beginning of the concerns. In fact, I propose we pause for a word from our sponsors and dive into the escalating concerns.